WOTC released Ravenloft Horrors Within last month, and with it released a bunch of new subclasses. In this continued series where I go through them all, we'll be going through the reworked Grave Domain Cleric, which in 5e was one of the better Cleric subclasses. Let's see if in 5.5 if it reaches those heights once again. So Grave Domain, for those who don't know, are clerics whose whole thing is trying to protect the balance between life and death, in which they have a balance of abilities and spells that protect life, but also hasten death for those creatures. Which, speaking of spells, first at level 3 they get their spell list, which is mostly the same as its 5e counterpart, although with some notable exceptions. With Bane no longer being on the list, with Detect Good and Evil now taking its spot, which is a pretty notable nerf, since Bane is by and far a much better spell in comparison. The second being Dispel Good and Evil versus Anti-Life Shell, which are about on par when it comes to their specific niches, but taking the list as is, it's okay. Nothing really stands out as top tier, other than Revivify and Raise Dead, but those are already on the Cleric spell list, but are nice to have always prepared, since now you can prepare other Cleric spells in their place. Next, they get Circle of Mortality. You can manipulate the balance between life and death, granting you the following benefits. Pull of Death. Once per turn, when you deal damage to a creature that is missing any hit points, by casting a spell, or by hitting them with an attack roll, that creature takes an extra 1d4 necrotic damage. The extra damage increases to 1d6 when you reach Cleric level 11. Return to life. You can cast Spare the Dying as a bonus action. Additionally, when you normally roll 1 or more dice to restore hit points to a creature at 0 hit points with a spell or channel divinity, don't roll those dice for healing, instead use the highest number possible for each die. For example, instead of restoring 2d4 hit points to a creature at 0 hit points with a spell, you restore 8. So this feature is pretty similar to the original. The newest addition with Pull Death is very nice, since it's now just a straight buff to Toll the Dead, which especially for Grave Domain is going to be your default damage cantrip. Since on top of scaling d12 damage, we get an additional d4 up to d6 damage as we level up, which again makes Toll the Dead even stronger. And the Return to Life feature is basically the same as the original, with Grave Domain being the kings and queens of yo-yoing the party and in general keeping them alive in combat. Last level 3 feature they get is Path to the Grave. As a bonus action, you present your holy symbol and expend a channel divinity to curse one creature you can see within 30 feet of yourself, until the start of your next turn. While cursed, the creature has disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. When you or an ally you can see hits the cursed target with an attack roll, you can end the curse early, no action required, to make the attack deal extra necrotic or radiant damage of your choice, equal to your cleric level. So this is where it gets interesting, since in 5e it was an action, but also cursed the creature with vulnerability on the next attack. Basically double damage for one attack, which was very strong. But now it's definitely not as powerful, but I still think it's pretty good, since now we're trading damage for a consistent debuff. Since with the creature now having disadvantage on attacks and saving throws, it is more susceptible to missing, and also now more vulnerable to spells either by yourself or by your party members, with the latter feature not really being useful, since even at max level, that's only 20 points damage, which unless you know that will kill the enemy, it's really not worth using, and just more worth it just to keep the debuff going. So despite it technically being a nerf to the original, I would still say it's a very good channel divinity and very much worth using. Next at level 6 they get Sentinel at Death's Door. When you or a bloody creature you can see within 60 feet of yourself is hit with an attack roll, you can take a reaction to have that attack's damage. If the triggering attack roll was a critical hit, any effects triggered by a critical hit are cancelled. You could use this feature a number of times equal to your Wisdom modifier, and you regain all expended uses when you finish a long rest. This is the second biggest change from the original, since the original only cancelled crits, no matter the health, which was very useful to negate high amounts of damage. But even then, it's obviously still very good, and still does what the original accomplished, albeit a tad weaker, since it has the obvious limitation of an ally needing to be bloodied. But now also being able to just have damage no matter what, if it's a crit or not, is really nice, since it can be used in situations where a squishy wizard is about to be killed by an enemy, which in 5e the wizard would just go down, but in 5.5 the Grave Domain Cleric can reduce the damage and possibly save the wizard from death, and give them a chance to either get away or take out the enemy in front of them. So once again, while a big change for the Grave Domain Cleric, it's still a very powerful feature for the Cleric, just now more applicable to more situations, and now not just an anti-crit button. Lastly, as its capstone at level 17, they get Divine Reaper. Your deep connection to this domain renders you a hallowed harbinger of death, granting you the following features. Enhanced Necromancy. When you cast a spell of 5th level or lower from the Necromancy school that targets one creature, or when you cast a spell from the Grave Domain spell table, you can expend a use of Channel Divinity to target a second creature within the spell's range. If the spell requires a costly or consumed material components, you must provide the material components for each target. Keeper of Souls. When an enemy dies 60 feet in front of you, you or one creature you can see within 60 feet of yourself regains hit points equal to twice your Cleric level. You can't use this feature if you're incapacitated, and once you use this feature, you cannot use it again until you finish a short or long rest, unless you expend a 6th level plus spell slot. No action required to restore the use of it. As a capstone, it's okay, with Enhanced Necromancy being the weakest feature of this, since there's not many spells that would benefit from a dual target casting. If we're just looking at the Grave Domain spell list, the only beneficiaries would be Brave Enfeeblement, although at this level it's really not worth using. Vampiric Touch, which if you are in a situation where there are 2 enemies within melee range of you, that this would be required, you are in a bad position and you need to leave. Blight, and technically Revivify and Raise Dead, but you would still need the equivalent material components for both targets, and is also a situation that doesn't really come up too often. While Keeper of Souls is a good improvement on its 5e counterpart, where the original relied on the creature's hit point dice pool, while in 5.5 it's much more consistent with 34 hit points, albeit can only use it once until a rest, or you use a spell slot, which does make it less consistent to use than 5e in that regard, but even then I still think this version is superior in the consistent healing department. So that's the Grave Domain Cleric in 5.5. Overall, I think WOTC made some good changes, while still making the Grave Domain Cleric a good subclass to play, without stripping away its identity and not nerfing it into the ground. If you enjoyed this video, why not leave a like and subscribe to keep up to date on when I post the next subclass video. Bye for now.